there's so many things I wanted to check in with you about. You talked about Wi-Fi connectivity in here, the digital divide that we know exists. But I want to focus in on the part where you talked about high quality professional development for school leaders, right? I was in the school, and it was extremely hard to get out of the school to do a professional development. If I missed one day or a few hours, that is another student that did not get their counseling, or in a teacher perspective, they didn't get the lesson. In the principal's perspective, the school is burning down. So how do we incentivize our leaders to step away, or is there something that we should be doing on the weekends, something we should be doing over the summer? When should we be looking to have our professionals get this development?
Great question. Professional development is definitely necessary, especially at the school leadership level, and we don't get enough, right? So, principal for 18 years, took the school from the worst school in the district to a national blue ribbon school, and I had to kind of find ways to get my own PD outside of the normal school day, school times, and school district. I think as a committee, we need to look at ways to be able to infuse professional development with school leaders. And I think during the school day is a great point, but we have to be strategic with it. One of the great things that did come from the pandemic, and there's so many negatives, but one good thing was that people were able to find ways to have meetings remotely via Zoom, Microsoft Teams, et cetera. And professional development can be done the same way. So there are ways to be able to locate times during the day when somebody could get strong and well-developed professional development, right? Not something where you're leaving for 6 to 8 hours and you're going across the town to do whatever, but really looking at direct PD during a certain time frame that's going to hit what principals or assistant principals or even teacher professions need in order to improve, and then possibly going from there. So I think that would be a step in the right direction, and make sure that things are what people feel they really need. That's another issue where people get professional development that they're like, oh, I already know that, or I don't really want to be bothered with that, or I only deal with 5% of that with the 95% of the other things I have to deal with. Is there another time that I could do these things or whatever? And let's be quite frank, folks. Most principals' days, as far as working, start after 3 p.m., after the children leave, right? Before then, we're doing everything that we need to do in order to make the school day successful for every child that comes in.
So I was thinking about this for a while now, and there's a hiring shortage. People are having a hard time deciding if they want to accept these jobs that we're talking about. But the other thing that we're having a hard time with in New York State is housing. And I saw that in the city, in New York City, that they hired teachers and they helped with their housing. They gave them an incentive, right? So I'm wondering, what do you think would be the effect if we had, I had a conversation with a school in Plattsburgh, and they said to me, they're having a hard time recruiting staff. What do you think housing would do for helping with the hiring shortage? Do you think that's a factor?
I have not heard superintendents specifically say we should do something to provide housing for people working in our schools. I have heard concern in some parts of the state that there's been a transition, particular areas with, for example, second home communities, where the people who work in and for the community can't afford to live there anymore. And I think that the tendency is to think, how do we offer more competitive salaries? I think another facet, somewhat similar, is providing childcare. That might be for people working in schools. That might be an attraction for people. If I understand correctly, right now schools, some schools have lost students, so they have space. But if I understand correctly, they could not charge for people to have their children served in an at-school child care program. That's something that we're looking into to see whether that's the case, and something that could be done as a benefit to make working in education more attractive.
Thank you. There's one group of students that we know were struggling pre-pandemic and struggling now, and that is our Black boys. We have seen learning loss from the beginning, right? And so I'm just wondering because you've done the tour, we've been talking to teachers, what new things or what have teachers been able to do to focus in on the population of students who we've seen have been struggling before the pandemic, and we know they're struggling after?
Correct. One of the things we've been advocating for and making sure that we actually have some practical things going on around the state is taking a look at teaching, right? So diversifying the workforce. So the students see themselves in their teachers, right? So I worked in the Bronx, very diverse population, and you could see that the kids who had a teacher that looked like them and made that connection were more attuned to saying, maybe I could be a teacher too. Maybe this is a path I can take. And I know from Yonkers to the North Country, there are these programs. So, and today it's not just take a look at teaching, it's take a look at being a paraprofessional, a teacher's aide, all of the titles within a school. So that has been one of our goals, and we've seen some progress on that.
I'm glad you said that about the diversifying the workforce. Is there any conversation around partnering with HBCUs, because we know that they are graduating teachers every year, teachers of color every year?
Right.
Is there any program that links the HBCUs with our New York State school districts?
I'm not sure if SED is doing that, but I'm sure
What are your thoughts on it?
That would be supported, for
Okay.
sure.
Thank you.
Thank
Just so
you.
you guys know, I am a former, I'm still a licensed social worker, but I worked in New York City public high schools as a social worker. And during COVID, I was actually still in practice. And so a lot of what my experience has been is real life experience that I've had myself. I'm looking through the mental health part of your testimony, and I'm just wondering what allocations, now, we're not in post-COVID, even though people are saying it, what allocations are we making towards mental health in a real way, where we come from, I come from a school where we had 2 social workers and 571 students, which was a big deal to even have 2 people with that caseload, right? I know there are schools that have 1 that circulates. So what real things are we putting in place to make sure that we have the mental health workers there to support our students and our staff, because they as well were dealing with a lot of trauma?
Sure. There is a $100 million appropriation that the legislature and the governor enacted in the current fiscal year. There is an RFP for roughly $50 million of that $100 million. This was a 2-year appropriation. That RFP is currently in process. From the department's perspective, while the $100 million is certainly welcome and needed, we feel that given the magnitude of the mental health issues that we are and our school districts are facing, that these should no longer be competitive grants. The significance of the trauma and the difficulties that our schools are encountering with our students indicates that putting school districts in a competitive position with each other often leads to those school districts most in need not receiving the funding that they need in order to address the issues that they're confronting. Angelique, do you have anything more you'd like to add?
No, I think you've captured it perfectly. I cannot stress enough that competitive nature when it comes to RFPs and how it puts districts that are already dealing with certain disadvantages continue to experience them. I would also like to comment on our push and focus on really trying to encourage folks to go into this field. When we do have access to the funding, we need bodies to be able to hire and put into these positions. So that is something that we are working on through our certification process and looking to encourage people, partnering with organizations to provide access to individuals so that we can help our young people.
That makes absolute sense, and I'm just wondering, since we know that the schools or school districts that are most disadvantaged will probably not be competitive, what additional things are we putting in place to make sure that they have access to even knowing that the RFP exists and being able to walk through the process?
We insisted that districts be able to come together to apply for grants. We also insisted that they be able to do that through their boards of cooperative educational services. I think that it's critical, given the number of small rural districts in the state that simply do not have the capacity to apply for these grants, that they're able to come together, do it jointly, and that they are able to use their BOCES as the recipient of those grants through the RFP process.